And wow, you found some interesting sources for this one. Fox, Christianity Today, Politico, even Al Jazeera English.
Yeah.
It's going to be a wild ride.
You can say that again. The reactions to Trump's victory are all over the map. Some folks are thrilled, others are, well, let's just say less than thrilled. And a lot of people are still trying to wrap their heads around it all.
It's definitely a lot to take in. But one thing that's clear from these articles is that this wasn't just some squeaker of a win. Trump took both the Electoral College and the popular vote, even flipping some counties that went blue in 2020. I mean, what happened there? What changed?
That is the big question, isn't it? And it gets even more complicated when you consider the historical context. This is the first time a former president, charged and convicted of felonies, has won an election. It makes you wonder if this victory provides some kind of legal shield going forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And speaking of things that make you go, there's this one little detail in the Politico article that caught my eye. Apparently, the Congressional Black Caucus had put together this $10 million plan to mobilize black voters, but the Harris campaign decided not to go with it. Any thoughts on that?
Honestly, it's always kind of a guessing game trying to figure out the inner workings of campaign strategy. But what we can say for sure is that there's been a definite shift in voter sentiment, and not just in one group. Understanding these shifts is key to understanding the political landscape we're in and what it might mean down the road.
Absolutely. I mean, these shifts are happening against a backdrop of some pretty strong feelings. You've got celebrations on one side, anxieties on the other, and then you have this Christianity Today article talking about how to stay sane in the middle of what they call the nonstop Trump show.
Right. Not exactly your typical political analysis, but it does speak to just how intense things are right now. I mean, they're basically saying, hey, this news cycle is a lot, so take care of yourselves out there.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying it's important to be informed, but you got to draw the line somewhere and protect your own sanity, too.
Exactly. Now, all that being said, the big question is, what does this all mean for actual policy? Trump's Agenda 47 is laying out some pretty ambitious goals, especially when it comes to immigration. Sealing the border, more deportations. It's already got groups like the ACLU gearing up for a fight.
And they've got a history with Trump, right? I mean, they filed over 400 lawsuits against him during his first term, challenging policies like the family separations and the travel ban. If history repeats itself, things get pretty heated pretty fast.
Yeah, and it's not like the players have changed. I mean, look at Tom Homan. He was the guy behind those family separation policies, and he's back advising Trump. It just makes you wonder if we're going to see more of the same and what that means for the human cost of these policies.
It's a heavy thought. And it's not just immigration on the agenda. Trump's platform is also taking aim at education, specifically talking about cutting funds for schools that teach critical race theory and radical gender ideology. That sounds like a pretty big potential shift in education policy.
It does. Now, completely dismantling the Department of Education, that would take an act of Congress, so it's probably not happening. But Trump can still make his mark, on the funding cuts, regulatory changes, that kind of thing. That could affect a whole range of programs, from LGBTQ plus student protections to what gets taught in classrooms.
Okay, so immigration, education. What about healthcare? Trump's been pretty vocal about wanting to repeal and replace Obamacare, but the thing is, the Affordable Care Act is actually pretty popular right now. Over 60% approval rating, according to some polls. How do you see that playing out?
Well, this might be where Trump's famous art of the deal comes into play. Think of it like negotiating, right? You have your ideal outcome, but you're also realistic. You know you might have to give a little to get a little. Trump's a smart politician. He knows there's a risk in just scrapping a popular program entirely, so maybe he goes for modifications, some tweaks here and there, instead of a full-blown repeal.
So more like strategic maneuvering than a complete demolition job.
Exactly. It's about finding a path that gets him what he wants with the least amount of political blowback. It's definitely a chess game, that's for sure. And speaking of global chess games, let's talk about the international scene. How is this second Trump term going to play out on the world stage, especially when it comes to those tricky relationships with China and Russia?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, looking through these sources, it seems like everyone's kind of holding their breath, waiting to see what a Trump presidency 2.0 means for the rest of the world. It's that whole unpredictability factor, right? Will he start slapping tariffs on everything, pull out of international agreements left and right, maybe buddy up with some leaders who don't exactly share our values?
And don't forget the elephant in the room, or maybe we should say the bear on the border. I mean, the situation in Ukraine adds a whole other layer of complexity to this. Trump keeps saying he could end the war like that, but what does that even mean? More support for Ukraine. a complete 180 on our current strategy. Who knows with this guy? His track record doesn't exactly scream consistency.
Right. And it sounds like Europe's getting a little twitchy about all this. The Al Jazeera article mentioned they're already bracing for potential trade wars, especially those German car makers. It's pretty telling that Germany's own ruling coalition fell apart, even with the possibility of a Trump comeback looming over them.
Yeah, it just shows you how much uncertainty and, frankly, anxiety there is over in Europe right now. It's a reminder that what happens here doesn't stay here. Trump's decisions have ripple effects all over the globe, and everyone's watching to see what he's going to do next.
No pressure, right. So, while we're talking about things that can send shockwaves around the world, let's touch on those Vox predictions for 2024. They cover everything, from economics to climate change to, get this, advancements in AI. My brain's already hurting.
I hear you. It's a lot to process. But you know what I like about Vox's approach? They actually assign probabilities to their predictions. They're not claiming to have a crystal ball. They're acknowledging that the future is messy and complicated, especially these days.
True. It's like they're saying, here's what we think might happen, but take it with a grain of salt. They're giving Trump a 55% chance of winning a third term in 2028. It's like a slightly better than even coin toss, which is kind of wild when you think about it. It just goes to show that even the seemingly impossible can happen.
Exactly. And they don't shy away from the tough stuff like climate change. They're predicting with 80% certainty that 2024 will be even hotter than 2023. And last year was officially the hottest on record. It's a reality check, right? We're facing some unprecedented challenges here, and the choices we make today are going to have a lasting impact.
Okay, so on that cheery note, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the social trends that are emerging in the midst of all this.
Yeah.
That Al Jazeera article mentioned this movement called 4B, which started in South Korea. It's basically women saying no to the whole traditional life script: marriage, kids, dating, even sex. It's a protest against societal pressures and gender inequality.
Wow. I mean, it's a pretty radical stance, you have to admit, but it speaks to a deep sense of frustration, like, if this is the world I'm supposed to fit into, count me out.
I totally get that. It makes you wonder what other social movements might pop up in response to this whole political climate.
That's a really interesting question. And while we're on the topic of social movements, that same Al Jazeera piece also mentioned the whole go back to Starbucks thing. It's basically Black Americans calling out performative allyship, saying, look, the fight for racial justice didn't end with a hashtag.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling of, like, exhaustion, but also this fierce determination to keep pushing for change. It's pretty inspiring to see groups like the ACLU, feminist activists, political commentators, all using their platforms, whether it's the courts, the streets, social media, to challenge policies they see as harmful.
Right. It's a reminder that change doesn't just magically happen. It takes sustained effort, strategic alliances, people willing to speak truth to power. It's a long game, often an uphill battle, but it's essential to keep fighting for a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Politics, social trends, global anxieties. It's a lot to process. But one thing really jumped out at me from those Vox predictions. All that stuff about potential breakthroughs in science and technology, like they mentioned the FDA might approve MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. That could be a game changer for folks struggling with trauma.
Absolutely. And it's not just some pie-in-the-sky idea either. Vox gives it an 85% chance of happening. That means there's some serious momentum behind this. More research, more positive results, even public opinion seems to be shifting.
Yeah, it feels like we're on the verge of a whole new era in mental health treatment, exploring all these different approaches that could really make a difference in people's lives.
Totally. And it's not just about MDMA either. Vox is also predicting OpenAI will release ChatGPT-5 by the end of the year. They're giving that a 75% chance of happening. Now imagine AI tools like ChatGPT, but even more powerful, even more sophisticated. That's a whole other level of whoa.
Mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're already seeing how AI is changing the game in so many industries, from education to healthcare to the arts. A new supercharged ChatGPT could really shake things up. It makes you wonder, what's the role of human expertise going to be in a world where AI can do so much?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's one we need to be thinking about now as AI keeps evolving at this crazy pace. The ethical implications, the potential downsides, it's all got to be part of the conversation. How do we make sure these incredibly powerful tools are used responsibly? How do we minimize the risks and maximize the benefits? We can't just sit back and wait to see what happens.
So to sum it all up, we've got a political landscape that's, well, let's just say dynamic. Social movements are gaining traction, the world's holding its breath, and technology is about to take another giant leap forward. The next 4 years are going to be anything but boring.
You got that right. And I think all the sources we've looked at today really highlight the challenges we're facing, both as a nation and as a global community. But they also show that there's hope, there's resilience, there's a chance for real progress if we're willing to work for it.
So what does all this mean for you, dear listener? Well, for starters, stay informed, stay engaged, and don't forget, you have a voice. Use it. Make a difference, even if it's just in your own little corner of the world.
Right. And remember, the future isn't some fixed destination. It's something we're all creating together through the choices we make, the actions we take, and the hope we hold on to, even when things get tough.
It's been a wild ride, folks, but that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And remember, even in the craziest of times, there's always hope. Hold on to that. We'll see you next time.